The next step in this process is to put our bullnose on here. It's going to be a half-round bullnose coming off of just the top tiles. Now, the first thing we need to do is to establish a line as to where this bullnose is going to start. So I'll do that by coming down the edge with a roll of 1/2-inch tape. And I'm using this just as a spacer. And by the way, if some of the tiles are not lined up perfectly now, this is going to allow us to straighten that out. In other words, I'm going to get a straight line down through here. So my next step is to come down along the outside of that. I'm going to cut just down, right straight down along that tape. I can see that my positioning tape right through my masking tape. So I'm going to bullnose right up to this edge. Do a double layer to help protect that tile. I'm putting a layer of tape across the bottom also.
This will protect it from getting scratched from my grinding and sanding.
After I do my initial grinding with my coarse bit, I'm going to put a black guide coat on with a can of spray paint. So that means I need to mask this off. There's probably a half-dozen different ways that we can put this bullnose on the front. I started out using this bit. It's very aggressive, and if you're not careful, you can put some gouges in it, but I needed to also level some of these tiles off to the front. You're going to see me do that. Next, I'm going to graduate to this 80 grit disc, and after that, I'm going to go to an orbital sander with some 220, with some 400, then we'll go to wet. Now, this is going to create a lot of dust, so the safety equipment you're going to need is a respirator, earplugs for the angle grinder I'm going to use, and eye protection.
I'm grinding across just the top of this blade. You don't want to get down into the spindle area or you're going to end up gouging your workpiece. Make sure you hold the grinder flat to the workpiece. Don't tilt it up on the side. This corner piece sticks out just a little bit beyond the vertical piece. You can certainly see the importance of establishing that guideline.
As you go up through the various steps, and especially on the coarse steps, what you may want to do is give yourself a guide coat. Now, since I'm using white marble here, I'm just going to take and spray some black on it. Just a real light coat. I've allowed my guide coat to set up a little bit and have switched to an 80 grit pad.
I'm applying a guide coat for the next step.
I'm going to leave the masking tape around the bottom here just to protect it in case I run my orbital sander down over it. But what I want to do now is get all of that guide coat off with my 180. If you're purchasing an orbital sander, It's nice to have one with dust collection on it because it just makes it so much easier that I don't really like respirators, although, again, as I mentioned, coming out of the auto body industry, we wore them all the time.
Again, I need to stress that it's very important to hold your tool flat to the work surface. Don't be afraid to change sandpaper. As soon as you see that it isn't cutting, put a new piece on.
Again, this is 120 grit. So that's the process using the DA sander. Again, I'm going to move up from 180 to 220 to 400. Once I get done with the 400, we'll take a look at the wet polishing. I'm switching up to 220. I'm switching up to 320. And by the way, I'm using about 2 pieces as I go around here. Even though the sandpaper doesn't appear to be dull, once you run your hand across it, you'll find that it does get dull quite quickly. I'm also moving up on the edge a little bit further now, trying not to go flat, but I'm getting right up on that edge. Next, we're going to move into wet sanding and polishing. What I'm going to do is start out with some 320 grit paper. Then I'll move up to 400. Then I'm going to move up to 800. Then I'm going to move up to 1500, and then I'll move up to 2000 if I need to. I may switch to a polish before I go to the 2000.
This paper must be marked for use as either wet or dry. It can be purchased at most automotive stores and hardware stores and comes in a variety of different brands. I personally have always preferred 3M products.
I was always taught to take a piece of, if we've purchased full sheets of sandpaper, again from back in my auto body days, I was always taught to fold that piece of paper in 3 pieces and then flip it and change sides as I need to. Another thing that I like to have is one of these rubber squeegee blocks. This is available through an auto body supply house. I'm not so sure whether the big stores like Advanced Auto Parts would have something like that or not. You'll have to check. But generally, these are going to be found used in conjunction with the auto body business. The next thing I want to have is, of course, a bottle of water to spray water on, and the third thing is we should have a bucket of water with a sponge and a towel to dry off what we've done so we can take a look at it. So I'm going to actually get my sandpaper very wet. I'll take and spray this a little bit and start sanding. Now I'm taking this squeegee and just wrapping that squeegee around that edge. It's very important whenever you wet sand something to keep it clean, especially as we go up through the grits. I don't want any residue left on there from what I did before. Now let's just take and dry that off. We'll take a look at it. It's starting to look pretty nice. So what I'm going to do now is just move all the way up through here and wet sand this with my 320 paper. This is 400. Now it's starting to get a little creamy, so I'm going to just add a little bit more water. And you can see that it's caking on the back of my sandpaper somewhat. So you want to keep it nice and wet. Keep washing that sanding away. Make sure you have lots of water on it. I'm now moving into the 800 grit stretch. Now this should start putting a little bit of a polish on this. You'll see it start to shine. Okay, let's dry it off and see what it looks like. As you can see, we're now starting to pick up a little bit of a shine on this. I've moved up to the 1500 grit paper. And this is probably the most important part of it. This is where you really got to be cleaning it off and looking at what you're doing to make sure that you've got a nice polish on it. I'm going to come down on the top fairly heavy. But this is the important one. If you see any deep scratches when we clean this off, you might have to go back to some 800 or 400 paper. Clean it up in one particular spot and then move back and come on up with the grits. But this is where you want to catch any imperfections. I've decided to go ahead and hit this lightly with some 2000 grit paper. I'm not going to use a squeegee, I'll just use my hand on this. Oh man, I love it. This is great. The last thing we need to do to our bullnose is to polish it. Now, you can do this by hand, or as I'm going to do it, I'm going to use a machine to do it. If you're going to use a machine to do it, you want to mask off the rest of your workpiece simply because you don't want this stuff flying down into the cracks of where your grout's going to go. So I mask this off. I even mask off the edge again on this side. Now this side here, there's two places here where I polished some scratches out, and I'm going to hit them with the buffer. So I did not mask this side off. Now, there are several different products we can use to polish this. For the real DIYer, go to Walmart and buy a little can of DuPont 7 or any rubbing compound. Automotive rubbing compound is probably the best. This is automotive rubbing compound. It's 3M's 6060 extra cut rubbing compound designed for the automotive business. This is very expensive. I think I paid about $25, $30 for this quart. So it's not cheap stuff, and it does cut pretty quick. Put a little bit on, get on the edge, and just polish it. And you polish until the compound goes away. It'll rub away as you polish and dry out, and it'll give you a nice edge. So there it is with a hand polish, and I'll tell you what, that looks pretty nice. For a machine polish, I'm just going to use a buffer. I want to move this around on the buffer, smooth it out. And we have a very nice edge. So your choices are do it by hand, or if you have a buffer, do it with a buffer. Doing it by hand with this DuPont, or excuse me, with this 3M Perfected is not very hard to do. It cuts really fast. So the final step of this process is to simply go around with the file and clean up my grout lines. And that's all there is to it. Next step, we're going to grout it. If you have any questions or comments about this video, please post them and I'll certainly respond to you. You make it a great day, and thanks for watching.